All right, what's going on, everybody? I'm Sam Pascal alongside Eric Holterman, and this is KBO Chats Alive. As you can see, I don't know if you can actually see this. This is a brand new backdrop. It's actually now vinyl, no longer just paper. They were at a sale, so I thought I'd upgrade us for today. Brand new week of games here. We should hopefully have some games because of the rainouts. And we got a lot to get to. Power rankings, game previews, injuries, all that and more. Eric, how you feeling during this week of KBO action?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I'm glad that between the two of us, we've now been on ESPN's KBO broadcast an average of once per person. It's pretty nice. They didn't distribute it in the most fair way, but congrats to you for getting back on there, representing well.
Thank you. Well, yeah, super fan, of course. You got to be the super fan. Of course, you're the analyst, though. I defer to you for the go-to information. So I'm relying on you for these power rankings. So that should be a good one here as we welcome in some people. Barry, welcome in. Welcome back. We missed you last week. DX, always a classic. And, of course, the haircut, as Basicality is noticing that. So should be a good one today. So let's dive right in here. Power rankings. Eric, I don't have the Dinos hat on. That's because you finally dethroned them as number one on the power rankings here, as you can see on rotowire.com. You got the Kiwoom Heroes at number one, Dinos at two, and Bears at number three. Have you completely lost your marbles here? What is going on? Why are the Dinos not number one?
Yeah, we'll have to get you a new hat, it looks like. The Dinos, they just, they were more or less coasting on that early lead for quite a long time, and they still are in the standings. They still got, I believe it's a 3-game lead over the Heroes. But if you look at their performance over a pretty extended period, it's just not been as good as the Heroes. They're just 3 games over 500 over their last 43 games, which that's quite a long amount of time. That's the Dinos. If you extended that winning percentage over the course of the season, it would have them more or less in a tie with the Twins. So they've been playing like a playoff team, but not an elite one for, well more than a month, closing on 2 months at this point. And the Heroes, they've made up quite a big gap since I first started doing these power rankings at the very end of May. The Heroes they were 6.5 games back when I started these back on, I think it was the last day of May. So for all of June, July, and now a fair amount of August, the Heroes have been the better team by 3.5 games. And they're playing much better lately. The Dinos are really slumping, just 3 wins in the last 10. The injury bug is finally hitting the Dinos. I've talked about that before. One of the reasons they were able to get off to such a huge start as they were the healthiest of the good teams. But now they've had a number of small injuries, guys getting banged up, and potentially quite a big one as Chengmo Ku, who original reports just said he was being sent down to get some rest. Turns out he's battling forearm soreness and hasn't thrown in something like about 2 weeks. He's had injury issues in the past, and anytime you hear forearm with a pitcher, that's not good at all. Definitely don't want to assume the worst with Ku by any means, but sometimes forearm strain is the initial diagnosis of what turns out to be something as serious as a torn UCL. So the downside is quite bad with that injury news for Ku. And the Dinos already had a week back of their rotation, and now if they have to put one more week back end starter in there, that's real potential that they can lose that top spot.
Yeah, the Dinos, that rotation is crumbling right now. We'll see what they can do with it. But I do have to mention with the Heroes that they did technically lose Eric Jokic to the injured list. It looks like he's only going to be missing about 1 start, but you talked about this earlier. They kind of have that curse where they can't have more than 2 or 1 international player going for them at once. Is Addison Russell enough to make up for that loss of Eric Jokic and the ace he's been in that rotation?
Yeah, I mean, they are generally just a pretty good, well-rounded team. Their offense has led the way at times. Their pitching's led the way at times. So I think they can handle a brief loss for Jokic, and that's what it seems to be hinting at, based on what I've seen. It seemed like our note suggested he was going to miss at least 1 start, but maybe not a whole lot more. You're never happy to see shoulder issues for a pitcher. But MRI revealed just a bruise. So potentially I'd be more optimistic about that news than I was about the Chengmo Ku news for the Dinos. There's, of course, worries about Jake Brigham for the Heroes as well. He is back from his elbow injuries, but he's not pitching well, and that's definitely a risk. So it's not a comfortable lead at the top for the Heroes by any means. I just felt it was time to finally give them their due because they've been better than the Dinos over an extended period by at least a small to medium margin. So I think it's time to give them respect as the scariest team in the league right now.
And that's definitely fair, but don't forget about the Dinos. That run differential is something that, is respected a lot because of their early success, but they're capable of that, especially if Aaron Altair gets going again. So moving down, we see the Deucin Bears, KT Wiz, and the LG Twins. That would be the current playoff mix if the season ended right now. KBO takes the top half teams, takes them to the playoffs. How do we feel about the gap here now? You mentioned, mixing it up, giving the Heroes their due. How do you feel about the Bears at number 3 and the Wiz? Are the Wiz making that jump yet to overtake the Bears and shortening that gap? Or is there still a pretty clear 3-4?
I think it's pretty tight all the way down to 7 these days. I think the Bears have fallen off, in my estimation, a bit from where the Heroes have been. They won just a single game last week, and they were playing the Lions and Giants. Granted, they did have 2 ties, but that's not the performance you'd expect from a top-tier team. They're still better than only the Wyverns and Eagles runs per game. And that's calling them friendly park in the league, J Baseball Stadium, home. So that's a serious unanswered question. They've shown no real signs of answering it. They got Raul Alcantara and not much else, and that's a big worry there. Gap there is pretty small, and they're not even all that safe in the standings either. 3 games up on the Wiz. The Wiz 4th here, they're still 6th in the standings because remember they just started off quite bad, at least in the record department, if not the run differential department. So I wouldn't consider the Bears at all safe, especially when you've got a team like the Wiz is the team that's chasing everybody. I think the Wiz are as good as for anybody outside of those top 2 right now.
You're breaking up a little bit there, Eric, but I'm hearing a lot. Bears and Wiz very close right now. Standings, maybe reflective of that early kind of success by the Bears and lack of for the Wiz. But that's right where they stand right now, 3 and 4 in the power rankings. Moving down the Twins, Giants, and Tigers. I think this might be the lowest spot we've seen the Tigers in all year. I don't know how close you've been paying attention to that, but this team seems to be falling pretty far out of the playoff bubble right now. You have Aaron Brooks here as the key player to know. He's getting a lot of all-star attention, but I don't know if he's going to be enough now to carry this team that's just 40 and 35 right now.
Yeah, lost you there for a bit, but on the Tigers, it's been the starting pitching is pretty much all they had, or I guess their bullpen's been fine too. The pitching overall has been what they've had, but some of that, what had really impressed me about the team was the depth of that rotation, extending really full with both Aaron Brooks, Andrew Gagnon, paired with Chen Yang, who was the 2nd best pitcher in the league according to MVP voting last year, and Hee-Young Im, who had been a back-end starter for most of his career, but was pitching like a solid number 2 or 3. But Kim has pitched his way out of a job, Hee-Young Im has pitched his way out of the job and is now down in the Futures League. Because he's had something like an 80 ERA over his last 5-ish starts. And when they lose that starting pitching depth, when that was their main strength, when they've just got a normal amount of starting pitching depth and that shaky lineup, they're definitely not intimidating. They're still very much in the race. They still technically occupy the last playoff spot by half a game. But when they've lost that main strength, Hyunjin Yang still hasn't really turned it around. I think we'll get a chance to talk about him later. But they need to either get that strength back or finally have a little bit more of an offensive breakout, and it hasn't been happening. That's why they've slipped below the Giants, who've really been on a charge lately.
Yeah, speaking of the Giants, this team is hot right now, winning 6 in a row as of right now. You got Dixon Machado there, and when I see Dixon Machado's bat, I mean, I think what's going on here? Misnomer, a defensive-minded shortstop for much of this year, but now it looks like he's potentially leading the charge for this Giants team. Are they for real now? Are we officially taking them as a playoff contender?
I had given them no respect for far too long, but they've been on quite a run. They did tie the Bears in their most recent game, but they had a 5-game stretch where they scored at least 7 in each game and allowed no more than 4. They were blowing out. It's 2 games against the Tigers, 2 against the Wyverns, and then 1 against the Bears. Just really convincing wins. 5 in a row, outscoring their opponents 40-10 over a 6-game stretch, which includes that tie. They've got, again, no real star power that can compete with the Mel Rojas's of the world. Well, nobody can compete with Mel Rojas, but can compete with the next tier. They don't even have necessarily like a Preston Tucker tier kind of guy, but they've got several guys. They've got 4 hitters with an OPS over, or 5 hitters with an OPS over 800, which is perfectly respectable to kick that lineup off with. And they've got guys like Daiho Lee, who isn't what he once was, but has some power and can still get on base a ton. And when they've got some of their pitchers pitching better to go along with just Dan Straley, they're capable of this kind of run. They've played good teams tight for most of the year, but they're going to have to because their next, it's 11 games or so. It's Dinos, Heroes, and Bears. So quite a tough run. There's every chance that this is as high as they ever get in the power rankings. But hey, if they stay hot, I mean, there's no better time for them to be facing these teams. So there's at least an outside chance that they're in a playoff position in 2 weeks. Certainly wouldn't be my default expectation. I think even the good version of the Giants are well worth those teams. But they couldn't be hitting this stretch at a better time.
Yeah, Dinos, Heroes, and Bears. Oh my, this Giants team will for sure be tested. They got the Bears tonight, so we'll see if they're for real this time next week. Well, I guess we'll have to check back in on them and see if they really can move up and be for real, or if Dixon Machado really is just a defensive shortstop and, they're not for real. So we'll have to check back in on them. Twins, want to mention them before we move to the real bottom half teams here. They're going to be the most frequented team on ESPN this week. You see them there tonight against the Tigers, and then we have them again against the Tigers in the series finale, and then again 2 of 3 to conclude the week against the Dinos. What do we make of this Twins team? I've seen them as high as 3, but as low as 7. Now they're right there at 5. Tyler Wilson lost, but yet looked pretty good in that Heroes game. I don't know what to make of this team.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely playing better. Like I noted there, 12-6 of their last 18 games is great, but only 500 record against teams that aren't the Wyverns and Eagles. But playing those guys to help them wake up, and you do have to beat those teams, and they are doing it. I think they're right in the middle of that. I have them right in the middle of that 5-team group from 3 to 7. We've seen what they can do at times, especially when Roberto Ramos is on, and he's working his way back towards being on at this point. He's nowhere near what he was first of the year. And Chun-Soo Kim has been able to carry the offense while Ramos was struggling. He's one of the best hitters in the league, former major league, had a more or less unsuccessful 2 years with Orioles and Phillies, but could hit over here at least, and he can hit great in the KBO. So they've got some top end out there, and they've got a pair of pretty decent foreign starters in Tyler Wilson and Casey Kelly to lead that rotation. I think they're out of the depths of that slump, and they look like a legitimate playoff team again. But there's seven teams that look like they have a valid shot at it, so I wouldn't consider the Twins safe at all. I think they're closer to falling out of the mix than they are to getting back to number 2, which I think they were number 2 at one point early in the season.
Yes, I think a big concern with this Twins team that we've shared is that pitching staff. Can you talk about what you're seeing from Tyler Wilson? As I see this note here, is saying, past 3 or 4 starts, he's been on fire and looking like a true ace, because this was a pitching staff we've largely made a lot of fun of, that Casey Kelly and Wilson could not maintain a playoff team. Has that changed at all in your mind? Do you get that? Hello?
Yeah, I think those two, their ERAs again have been still inflated by those very early starts right after quarantine, when they had to, sit in a room for 2 weeks and then head straight into pitching in a KBO game. Those didn't work out too well for them, like you might expect. If you throw those out, they've still been solid number 2, 3 type starters. They'd be much more of a threat if they had a Raul Alcantara and Eric Jokic type, but I think they're good enough to lead a team to the playoffs, and I'm not sure if they have enough to really threaten the top teams when they get there.
All right, so that's the Twins at number 5 in the power rankings. Now coming down to the bottom teams, the true bottom half teams that are really not looking like a playoff contender, at least this year, right now, about 70-plus games into it. Samsung Lions, Hanwha Eagles, and the Wyverns. Looks like officially the Wyverns are the worst team in the KBO. It's finally been done. I think this is a big one. Definitely not as big or positive as the Heroes supplanting the Dinos, but definitely something. Wyverns taking down the Eagles for that bottom spot.
Yeah, really, because the Eagles are playing well, but they did go, 2-2-1 or something over last week. That's good by their standards. I would have looked a lot better doing this if the Wyverns didn't get their last game of the week. But still, that came over, ended an 8-game losing streak where they were just competitive in all of them. The closest game they had in that 8-game losing streak, they lost it by 5. And in the last 6 games of that losing streak, they scored a total of 4 runs. They were just completely uncompetitive. Reminiscent of the Eagles' worst stretches. There you go. Average score. That's I didn't look at exactly what the worst stretch at Eagles' 18-game losing streak was, but it couldn't have been much worse than that. I still think the Wyverns have a bit more talent than the Eagles, at least at the top end, but just would not be at all scared to play them these days.
Yes, and one other team in this.
But there's been, so they deserve to be number 10.
Thankfully, at least they're not number 11. We know the Eagles got pretty down there in the power rankings not that long ago, so good to see them at least move up a little bit. Definitely not playoff caliber, though. Samsung Lions, what were someone we were looking at for that dark horse playoff spot, that number 5 spot? Are they just bad now? What happened to this Lions team? Are they still good at fielding, at least? I mean, they're falling a long way from where we once thought they could be.
Yeah, just 8 wins in their last 25 games. I always thought they were kind of playing over their heads. I had ranked them up pretty highly, maybe as highly as 4th at one point, just because they were the hottest of a big group of teams in the middle. But it always seemed a bit fishy. Many of their pitchers were outperforming their peripherals by a pretty significant amount. Their lineup's been only mediocre at best, and that's when they did have a foreign hitter. They don't have one right now. Daniel Palka is still probably about 2 weeks from being able to play for the team. He's currently in quarantine in Korea. It's just not a lot going on the offensive side, and not a lot going on the pitching side either, though they do get a good start from David Buchanan every now and then.
You gotta love me some David Buchanan. At least he can look like an ace every other start, at least. So moving on now.
Most lineup, starts.
Take a look. Most starts, if I can say that. Most starts now. Hope we don't jinx them with that. But moving on to the daily lineup today. I want to first start with the Eagles as they take on the new number 1, the new number 9, and the new number 1 face off. And when I look at this pitching matchup, Warwick Saffold taking on Wante Choi, I see 2 pitchers that look exactly the same in terms of run prevention, strikeouts, and walks. This was one of the focus games on the KBO show today. And I would think the best bet here would be the over. because both these pitchers have given up 11+ runs over their past 3, and they do not get that many strikeouts. What do we see with Sappold and Tae-Choi tonight?
A lot of runs tonight, not a lot of trustworthy pitching. So if anyone's noticing that we have bad connection, it's probably on my end because we had a tornado warning here in Chicago earlier, and we didn't lose our power, but it seems like we don't have awesome internet right now. So apologies to you guys about that. I will prevent the tornado next time if I can. Choi, Sappold, even when he's at his best, it's very few strikeouts. And he's just relying on basically batted balls finding his hitter's gloves. He's done that at times. It has worked out, but a 13% strikeout rate on the season is quite low. From a fantasy perspective, that's pretty low upside. Pretty huge downside here, too, against the Heroes, as hot as their offense has been lately. He doesn't walk guys, just a walk rate under 4%, but that's more or less the only thing that he's done particularly well. He's really struggled over his last 6 starts, 7.75 ERA over 6. So I was not a fan of his when we were going well, and now not, and I remain not a fan. One Tae-Choi on the other side, though, this is more interesting to me. He had ERAs under 4 in each of the last 2 years, and he had an under 4 through his first 10 starts this year. But then he ran into just an awful July. ERA of 11.25 and a WHIP of 2.19 in his 4 starts in the month of July. But he did apparently bounce right back when the calendar flipped to August with a pretty strong start, a good Wiz team. So there's reason to believe he might be back, and he doesn't need to be all the way back to shut down a lineup as bad as the Eagles. There's certainly potential for him to get blown up again. Most of those blow-ups were against, well, the Bears and Wiz are good offenses, but the Giants and Tigers weren't necessarily. So he's got the potential to allow some runs to these guys too. But I have more faith in him given that he's been generally pretty strong for most of the year and most of the last 2 years. Whereas Sappold, things are going well, he's not the kind of pitcher I have a ton of trust in. Amount of faith in either guy. There's a chance that it ends up with Choi having a strong enough start to keep the Eagles to hit under. But I would lean over here. I'd lean pretty comfortable as well.
Like the over here, leaning towards the Heroes. That's an interesting take on Choi because I very much saw those strikeout and walk numbers and said, this is a non-factor of a player tonight. But when you look at what he did in that August start on the 5th, 7 innings, a whip of 1, I mean, that's respectable, especially when you're facing Becco Gong and that Mel Rojas Jr. offense. Racked up 17.5 DraftKings points. So definitely got to give the edge to him in this matchup. Anyone offensively we're looking at, Brandon Barnes on the Eagles side has pretty much been the only factor. Anyone we've really talked about on that Eagles team? Is there anything else beyond that could be of value?
Yeah, not a ton beyond Barnes. Some of the top guys, young kids, Suquan No, okay at time option. Barnes hasn't even been everything you expect. His OPS is 700s, but it's getting at least to something. Heroes. We know they're quite deep. Most of the top 6 or so guys I'd be happy most of the time. Kyung Cheng, their leader guy, their usual. So again, Sappold has had some decent starts, but it's mostly when every slatted ball finds his fielder's gloves. Even that, not a scary matchup for a team as good as the Heroes.
All right, moving on. We have the Tigers and Twins. We talked about this earlier. This game is going to be on ESPN. We have 2 pitchers that I see as average. I mean, is there any Any insight here you can give us on these pitchers that might skew one way or another? I think, the Twins pitcher here, Shan-Hung Jung, has the better ERA, but his last two starts actually, giving up 5 earned runs in each, kind of scares me. So what are we looking at with this pitching staff?
Yeah, I wanted to have Jung as one of my recommendations today. The pitcher slate is very weak. One note about these pitchers, if you hate strikeouts, this is a great day to watch some KBO. We have 5 of the 6 lowest strikeout rates among qualified starters going slate. 9 of which belong to these guys. They are each best pitcher in the league. And the best pitcher, Josh Lindblom, is now in MLB and should be the best pitcher in KBO. As you can tell by the ERA, he is definitely not.
I think we got most of that there. Still breaking up. I have to unconnect you, reconnect you, turn it off, plug it back in, all that tech. Of course, we've had actually some pretty good shows handling that, but looks like we're trying to get that figured out with Eric now. Looking at Tigers pitcher today, you can see this note here on rotowire.com. Of course, we have the best insight. If you're just looking for a little nugget, just kind of what's going on with these guys, it's really easy to just check out the site. You can head to news as well. It's right there, that tab right there, to get the latest insight as well as the in-depth stats, as you can see here. Jiang, 4 earned runs in his last start. That was, of course, here in August. So maybe not someone you want to rely on. A guy I've been very high on offensively has been Preston Tucker. He's in this Tigers lineup. And it's always great to see that note that he hit a home run this month, but that was back on August 6th. So if you take a look a little deeper into Tucker's stats, we see here 2 home runs, but not one since that August 8th, which actually isn't that long ago, if you actually think about it, but just no hits in that Dinos finale. So hopefully Tucker will be able to turn things around. Eric,
I'm back.
can you hear me? I think we're back.
I don't know what happened there. I'm still going to blame that tornado, or almost tornado.
Well, 2020 is crazy. Just blame it on that. So we were just talking about the great notes you can find here on rotowire.com. And Preston Tucker, I think we broke up. You talked about Tigers pitcher here being that next Lindblom guy for them, being that number 2 in the KBO, but has not been so far this year. Maybe you can re-explain that for the listeners at home.
Yeah, I mean, he was elite last year. 2.29 ERA, a whip of 1.07, with the underlying numbers to more or less back that up. But then what do you do? I mean, so he's the equivalent of who was the second best pitcher in MLB last year? Maybe DeGrom or Cole, whichever one you don't think was best. How would you react if one of those guys had an ERA of 5.92 through about 15 starts? It's tough to say. We know this guy's talented, but he's just not pitching like it lately. But he's had a run of decent starts in his last few, striking out more than a batter per inning over his last 3, 18 strikeouts in 16.2 innings. Still not a great start against the Twins his last time out. So I don't have a ton of confidence in him, but I did write him up as one of the pitchers today, just because, again, the alternatives are very weak. But he's been shaky enough throughout the year that I wouldn't be all that confident in him holding the offense down for the Twins, especially since they've been better lately. It's a decent chance we hit the over here, given that, again, the pitcher who's supposed to be elite hasn't been. Shan-Hung Jung was a reliever almost the entirety of his career. I think his most recent starts before this year were in something like 2009, maybe 2010. And they've been using him, interestingly. If you look at a time between all the starts there, he makes one start, then he goes back down for one turn. I think he's alternating with the young guy, Minho Lee. I'm not sure if that's an exact pairing like that, but they've been doing that with both of them. And it was working early. I mean, you see a lot of low numbers in his runs allowed, and then just hit a wall in his last 2 starts. Not a huge sample, but those are some pretty bad teams too. Again, the Giants have been better lately, but I believe that start was long before their strong stretch. So 2 bad starts against the Wyverns and Giants. Don't fill you with a ton of confidence in him at all. He is playing the Tigers, who have not had a very good offense, but I wouldn't really trust either pitcher here. So I think I'd be leaning over, like I'm probably going to do with more or less every game here.
Yeah, I see he can go 9 innings, but keep in mind that competition was the Wyverns way back in June. So definitely, liking that over, especially when you consider the past 2 starts. So that's what we're looking at for this Tigers-Twins matchup. Moving on, we got the Dinos taking on the Giants. This one will be an interesting one, seeing if the Giants can take their hot streak against the Dinos and continue their success. Giants finally have Adrian Sampson making his debut. He was supposed to make it a while ago, but a couple rainouts. He's now starting tonight, weather permitting, of course. And going up against basically a relief pitcher. Looks like it's going to be a bullpen day for this Dinos team. Eric, is Adrian Sampson someone we should respect tonight on the slate?
We should respect him more than a 6.24 ERA. I think he's getting slammed by his BABIP. BABIP of 391. That's batting average on balls in play. It's not entirely luck related for those who don't have experience with the stat, but it's close to it. If a team has a particularly strong or weak defense, could affect that. If a guy's allowing terrible contact, you'd expect a high number. But a lot of it just has to do with, hey, did they slam that liner directly at my fielder or 10 feet to the side? And so 391 BABIP, the league average is in the low 300s. MLB, it's right around exactly 300. It's a little bit higher than that in KBO, but it's well below 391. So you've definitely got to figure that ERA is inflated by some bad luck. He's by no means a dominant arm, pretty low strikeout rate. He is not part of that group of 5 of the 6 lowest strikeout rates among qualified starters, but that might just be because he's not a qualified starter because he's had some injuries. Maybe he's a bit higher than that. 15.3% is not terrible. It's not Hee Kwan Yu levels like we'll get to soon, but it's not good. He avoids walks. He hasn't done a ton of good things, and he's facing the Dinos lineup, which you still got to respect a ton. Though it's not the Dinos we're used to. They've lost a couple guys. We talked about Cheng Mo Koo on the pitching side. They lost Jin Sung Gong to a thumb injury. Not sure how long he'll be out for. Yuji Yang left Sunday's game with a shoulder injury. Is it a numb shoulder? Which I'm not sure exactly what that is going to lead to in terms of time missing. Maybe none at all. Not sure. But it's a banged up team like they haven't been in a while, and they have not been hitting their best. So there's a shot that he has a good start here. He's coming up at 2 out of 3 decent starts, although one of them was shortened, I believe, by injury. So it's not out of question that Sampson could do enough, especially if this Giants lineup keeps hitting like they've been hitting lately. Again, that was a run of like 5 or 6 games. They were scoring 7 or 8 every single game. And they'll have a pretty easy task, I think, for against this Dinos pitching. It's not entirely clear to me if it's going to be a bullpen game or a start. Hyun-Sik Jang for the Dinos has only been a reliever at the KBO level the last 3 years, but he has started in the past, and he's also started in the Futures League. I don't think it matters if it's a bullpen game or not, though. If he pitches, it's going to be trouble for the Dinos. He's got an ERA over 9 in a very small sample at the KBO level. 4 strikeouts to 6 walks. No reason to believe he's been unlucky there. In the Futures League, his ERA is 6.58. So again, really no reason to believe he's suddenly going to be able to shut out KBO hitters, even if it's generally not one of the better lineups in the league. So if he pitches a while, I would expect a lot of runs. If he leaves early, I would expect a lot of runs against that soft underbelly of the Dinos bullpen. I think it's not crazy to pick the Giants here. very weird to pick against the Dinos. You'd like there to be somebody better than Adrian Sampson on the hill for the Giants. But he hasn't been as bad as that ERA suggests. The Giants as a whole have been very good lately. The Dinos as a whole have been bad, and they're banged up. So I think I would pick Giants here.
Yeah, I don't have any confidence in Jang for the Dinos on that pitching staff right now. And I believe it was the first time, I've checked it pretty regularly, first time the Dinos have not been favorites. They're actually underdogs in this game, so the bookies agree with you here. And if we look at the last time these two teams faced off, that's when the Giants started getting hot here. As we see 11 runs. Yes, they gave up 9, so probably a lot of runs. That offense is to be respected. But it kind of set them on that great path here, like you were saying. But 4 straight games with 8 runs. You include 7 in that, so that's 7 or more in 5 straight. Coming off that tie against the Bears, maybe they're cooling down, but I like this Giants team, and they're putting something together. I am worried about Sampson's injury coming off that, but it should be a good one to see what happens in this one. Here, offensively, we've talked about the Giants being hot, but maybe not super reliable. Do you like anyone in their lineup for DFS? Machado's batting pretty low. Who are you looking at?
Yeah, I actually did recommend Giant Stack today just because absolutely no faith in either the Dino starter or the Dino's long relievers, depending on what that plan really is there. I did include Machado with Asap Sun and Junwoo John. That's a bigger gap than I normally like in a stack. But I think Daiho Lee, you could start as the cleanup hitter, first baseman. Hoon Jung has been incredibly hot, their leadoff man, though he's got a ridiculous BABIP that's like been right around 400 or so for a long time. But most of those top several guys are worth a look, I think, given the pitching for the Dinos in this one. Question there about Jae-Kyung Hwang or Jin-Hyuk No for fantasy purposes. I did write up Dino shortstop Jin-Hyuk No tonight. He'll get the platoon advantage against Sampson, and Sampson's not somebody I trust at all. No's been incredibly hot lately. Let me see if I can find my stats that I wrote up on him. He's hitting .361 with 4 homers over his last, I'm not sure, 8 games or so. 7 or 8 games. So I think he's somebody I like. I think he comes considerably cheaper than Jae-Kyung Hwang. But I'd be a fan of Hwang as well. A little bit more expensive. I'm interested in stacking the Wiz as well. They were my other stack recommendation today. I actually didn't include Hwang, but that was mostly for budget reasons because Mel Rojas is just deservedly incredibly expensive, and Baek-ho Gong is pretty expensive too. So at their prices, I'm more of a fan of No tonight, but Hwang is absolutely somebody I'd be interested in, as I'm sure we'll get to soon.
Yes, Brandon, I believe first-time watcher. Thanks for coming in. Hope we answer your question there about some daily fantasy plays today. So, Dinos, Giants. You're picking the Giants, and you're picking the over. Is that correct?
Yep. There's a pathway where Adrian Sampson is good enough to get them to win on his own, but I think it's more likely that they outslug the Dinos in this one, which is a surprise given what they did for most of the year, but they've really been able to hit lately. So,
yeah. So moving on, we have that Wyverns Wiz matchup. I don't know how it is. We seem to always have the show on when Ricardo Pinto is pitching. We've been talking about this guy a lot recently, and I would say deservingly so, but he has not been good recently. He's been respectable early in the season, but recently it just gets worse and worse. Past 2 starts, 6 runs, 8 runs. Before that, 4 and 5. The long ball's getting to him. Man, are the Wiz just going to tear him up again tonight? I don't know if there's any hope for Pinto right now.
Yeah, he has not been pitching well. As former Philly, he's following me around. He had a 7.89 ERA for the Phillies back in that pretty dark times for the Phillies a few years ago. Can't say he was one of my favorite Phillies or anything like that. He is, really not been good at all this year. He had a low-ish ERA, or a respectable ERA for most of the year. But I've been saying for quite a while that some regression is coming hard because his strikeouts were barely higher than his walks over most of the season. And that regression is really coming now. Over his last 4 starts, it's an 11.29 ERA, a whip of 267, only 6 strikeouts against 14 walks over his last 4 starts. I haven't heard anything saying his job's in danger, but man, if it isn't, I'm not really sure what the Wyverns' plans are. They've already moved on from one foreign starter, Nick Kingham, who barely pitched and then was injured for most of the year. I don't know if it's too late for them to bother moving on from Pinto. They might just give him the rest of the year, but I can't really see why they'd continue to give him shots. It just has not been good. Even when he was pitching well, like I said, it was pretty much just home run avoidance. He'd only allowed 1 homer until that started on July 9th. And some pitchers do have the ability to avoid giving up home runs, either because they're really good and they don't give up much hard contact at all, or because everything's on the ground. We didn't have enough of a sample with Pinto to say that he really had that skill. And considering that he didn't seem to have many other skills, I would have been surprised. And again, 4 home runs allowed in his last 5 starts. He's clearly not having that good run of luck anymore. So he's definitely among the weakest on a very weak slate. He is, again, part of that group I talked about earlier, where we have 5 of the 6 lowest strikeout rate pitchers in the league among qualified starters going tonight. He is the second lowest strikeout rate of 10.9%, walk rate of 11.7%. More walks than strikeouts over the course of the year. Definitely not what you want.
Yeah, Pinto, I'll give him this. He's at least consistent. Last 3 starts, 4 walks in each. So it's just nothing's going good here. You can see the last start, 13 hits. He hasn't allowed 13 hits since May 19th. In that game, he actually put up 11.5 DraftKings points, but this time around, negative 17. So that 8 runs is not looking good. Going over to that Wiz side, Hung Jun So, pretty high ERA, but he'll have that Wiz offense behind him. And recently, he's actually looked pretty solid. I don't know if I can say ace level, but because he faced the Wyverns in that last start, but against the Dinos, 2 runs in 6 innings. I mean, that's pretty promising.
Yeah, I was very down on So most of the year because he hadn't done anything. He's 3rd lowest in strikeout rate, less than a tick better than Pinto, 11.7%. But he at least avoids walks. He's only walking 6% of opposing batters. So there's something there. He's an 18-year-old rookie. It's believable that he's getting better over the course of the year. Though it's not like he's necessarily dominating in his recent starts, still not striking out a ton of guys or anything like that. 11 strikeouts across 3 starts, but it's a 1.93 ERA and an 0.91 whip in those starts. I don't think a 3-start run is enough to say he's definitely, the good number 3 that the Wiz need to make their playoff push. But he's somebody I'm interested in for fantasy purposes tonight because he's quite cheap, because he probably isn't very good, but he gets to face the Wyverns, who, again, they're last in my power rankings for a reason. They are just non-competitive at the moment in most of their recent games. So I think he's a decent bet to have another low strikeout but low earned run game in this one.
Hey, we'll take that. Like you said, this pitching slate is very weak. So we'll see what he does, against that Wyverns team that basically is the worst team, the New Eagles. They're that bad. And they got Pinto. Wild thing, Pinto here, as Barry notes. We'll see what the Pinto experience gives us tonight. Taking Wiz, and we taking the over. Do you think the Wiz can produce enough to hit over 10.5 runs? Because So's not going to give up, more than 4 if he goes at least 6 innings.
Well, I think there's potential for So to revert to previous form, even against the lineup as weak as the Wyverns. But yeah, I'm pretty comfortably on the over here too. I think Pinto is a massive adventure these days, and the Wiz can score on far better pitchers than him. So I think it's probably going to end up as a clean sweep of overs tonight.
Wow. So we'll see if that holds true in this last game. And I think it's going to, again, when we look at those ERAs. The Doosan Bears taking on the Samsung Lions. Tang In Wan got the 6 wins. actually kind of crazy. These pitchers and these teams actually faced off. Last time they played was against each other for these pitchers, and he did decently. I think 2 runs in 5 1/3 innings, maybe hints, maybe an under, but I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, this time around they're playing at Daegu Samsung Lions Park. Last time around they were at Jamsil Baseball Stadium. So they've gone from the most pitcher-friendly park in the league to the most hitter-friendly park. Again, those aren't nearly the same extremes as Coors Field in MLB, but it's still definitely a factor. Taiyan Wan, I don't think he's nearly as good as that ERA. He's been generally pretty mediocre in the underlying numbers. Again, these are 2 more pitchers in that group of guys who don't get strikeouts. Hee Kwan Yu is lowest in strikeout rate at 8.7%, which is less than half of the league average. Taiyan Wan, compared to that, is striking out everybody, but it's still just 13.5%. So not a lot of strikeouts here either. Should be a ton of contact, a lot of balls in play. Yu seems to get into and out of jams all the time. He's the epitome of a crafty lefty. He's a veteran with no velocity anymore. I'm not sure if he ever had much, but it's low 80s, if that. A curveball that he throws in the 50s sometimes. I don't know if it's just for fun, but it seems to actually work. But it's not working lately. In theory, it could work. The Lions don't have the best lineup right now. They've had a bunch of injuries, and they're without a foreign hitter. But it's an extended run of pretty bad performances from Yu. He's allowed 7 or more hits in 6 straight starts. Over his last 8 starts, he has an ERA over 7, whip of 194. Like Pinto, he was a guy who had a lower ERA than it looked like he deserved, given his complete inability to put hitters away. And it seems like the bill's coming due lately. He is capable of occasionally, again, getting into and out of jams, but can we really even say that his previous start was good? He only allowed 1 earned run, but 10 hits, 3 walks against 2 strikeouts. That looks to me like somebody who, if those hits had been arranged in a slightly different order, he's allowing a lot more runs than just 2, just 1 earned. So I would not have a lot of faith in him, even against a pretty weak Lions lineup.
Yeah, that's definitely concerning when you look at those underlying numbers, like you're saying. A cool thing I just learned now here on rotowire.com, if you look at a guy's game log, you click on 2 dates, you can see the stats from those dates, and we can go back those 8 starts, like you were saying, you see that ERA over 7. That is something you definitely have to be worried about, even though he just gave up 1 run against his team just last week. Still very concerning. Offensively, I think this Lions team, is going to struggle scoring because of their lack of Polka. But Yu is pretty bad. Do you think they hit the over here? Is that the clean slate you're talking about here of overs?
I think I am, yeah, especially when you factor in that big difference in park. Also, the fact that both teams just got to see these pitchers, I think that generally does favor the hitters. Taiyan Wan did handle the Bears fine last time, but it's a very talented Bears lineup. I don't think he's going to have such an easy job again. Not a ton of faith in the Lions these days, especially because my usual go-to recommendation, Jawook Koo, lefty on lefty, don't necessarily love that. But Minho Gong, their catcher, is definitely worth talking about. He's somebody I recommended today as a cheaper catching option. He was quite bad early in the year at an OPS in the mid-6s through about 33 games. Went to the injury list for a bit with a side injury. Since he's come back, he's got an OPS well over 1,000. He's hitting like one of the best hitters in the league over a run of 29 games. He's been the best catcher and one of the best hitters overall. So he's somebody I think who could do some damage. He had a long career. He's 34. He had several strong seasons in his 20s. He's been falling off lately, as you'd expect, but he's been quite hot for quite a long time. Especially in the power department, got a lot of pop for catcher, but good all-around bat. He would be the Lion I would be interested in grabbing from this one. But overall, I think think somebody is going to get through on that Lions offense, and I think that the two pitchers are mediocre enough that I think we'll get yet another over here.
All right, that's all 5 games. So bad pitching. We got Samson coming back off an injury. We got the Ricardo Pinto experience facing off against that explosive KT Wiz offense. The Dinos trying to prove something. And we'll see what happens in that ESPN game, Kia Tigers against the LG Twins. And not to forget the Eagles taking on the Heroes, Sappled, Wante Choi. Let's get your top 3 picks here. You said the overs, but who do we feel most confident in, including the total and who's going to win straight up?
I think we've replaced team against the Eagles with team against the Wyverns. So that's going to be number 1 pick this time, Wiz over Wyverns. The gap between those lineups is huge. No real faith in Hyunjin So, but he's been pretty respectable lately, or even better than respectable, and the Wyverns have just been non-competitive. They did finally get a win in the last game of the week, but that ended an extended stretch where they were getting outscored by an average of more than 8 runs. Neither pitcher is somebody I have faith in, but Pinto I think is even worse, and the gap between the lineups is huge with the way Mel Rojas is hitting. He's even getting hotter.
Is that possible?
Apparently it is. His OPS over his last 12 games is in the 1600s now.
Jeez.
Yeah. There's no slowing him down. So that's number 1. I do still think team against the Eagles is good enough for the number 2 pick. I would go Heroes over Eagles. Or if Sappold is better than Ricardo Pinto, but not somebody I liked even when he was pitching well, and he's currently not pitching well. Wante Choi, again, was awful in July, but pretty good for most of the last 3 years. And he'll only have to be pretty good to beat the Eagles. So that's pretty comfortable Heroes on that one. And the third one would probably be one of those overs, because I think the other 3 games are pretty close. I guess Bears over Lions is pretty comfortable. We did just talk about every single over. I'm not sure which of the overs is the most over. So I guess I'll go.
Well,
now I'm thinking about it, I think I'll go Bears. Just because the Bears lineup is so much better than the Lions. And again, it's a pair of pitchers I don't have a ton of faith in. So I think Bears for number 3. Although you could easily convince me that one of the overs belongs ahead of the Bears for that number 3 spot.
That's fair. So Barry here taking LG with that 3rd pick. I definitely like that Bears game a little bit more because the offenses are familiar, very familiar with these starting pitchers. So I think that over in the Bears lineup, we forget they have Jose Miguel Fernandez, MVP guy early this year. He can explode, and I think he will tonight against that Samsung Lions team that is below 500 right now. So that's all we got. Pretty much ran it through. A lot of overs, a lot of bad pitching, and we like the Heroes, Wiz, and Bears. Anything else to add, Eric, for tonight's game?
I think that's it. Thanks to everybody who stuck with us despite those brief connection issues earlier. I will try to avoid tornadoes next time. Thanks for coming, guys.
Please do.